One of the reasons Nintendo has been so successful over the years and has been able to overcome its own shortcomings in a highly competitive gaming industry is because Nintendo is more than a company in the gaming business like Sony, Microsoft, or Valve. Nintendo is a game development studio just like Rockstar, Capcom, or Konami. Their most successful franchises, which are among the most valuable gaming properties in the industry, are games Nintendo developed internally by people who have been part of the company for decades. When it comes to making great games, Nintendo knows what the hell they're doing. There was another company, in every way similar to them, in the way they approached the gaming industry, one all gamers know well. SEGA! Sega was a major player in the coin-op arcades long before entering the home console market. Everyone knows about Duck Hunt and the Zapper for the NES, but did they know Sega had this 15 years before Nintendo? Sega Duck Hunt arcade cabinet was released in 1969, and unlike many target games before it, using actual figurines as targets, had the targets projected onto a screen. This cabinet was a follow-up to a similar shooter game called Periscope, also developed by Sega, released to the public in 1966. Sega would go on to make many more arcade hits throughout the decades, like Space Harrier, Golden Axe, Virtua Fighter, House of the Dead, and Crazy Taxi. Sega would take its first crack at the home console market in the early 80s with the SG-1000, which actually released on the very same day as the NES. It sold like a fart in a bottle compared to Nintendo's system, so Sega came back with the Sega Master System 2 years later, which was actually a reworking of what was the third iteration of the SG-1000. While this fared way better than the original SG-1000, selling over 10 million units, it also got curb stomped by the NES, being outsold nearly 6-1. Many will point out the reason for Nintendo's success was them making it where those who made games for Nintendo could not make games for other platforms. Sony has been using this tactic since the PS1, still uses it today, most notably with the release of Final Fantasy XVI. Nintendo pioneering the exclusivity deal makes them a smart businessman who understands the value of offering unique gaming experiences from their competition. Even after the SNES, when Nintendo was on the other end of these types of exclusivity arrangements, it didn't stop Nintendo from winning multiple console generations while not having any major AAA third-party releases on their platform. But I digress. Things weren't going well for Sega in the home console space, but they were not about to give up. In 1988, they would release what would be known to the States as the Sega Genesis, internationally known as the Mega Drive. At first, it looked like Strike 3 for Sega, as the platform got off to a rocky start. Sega would implement an aggressive marketing campaign going at Nintendo's throat, as well as connecting their games with the names of many popular celebrities at the time. Still, this did nothing to loosen the grip Nintendo had on the home market until the advent of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sega would put the fate of their platform on the back of this speedster in bundling Sonic with their console, replacing Altered Beast. This would prove to be successful as Sega would control a majority share of the market 2 years later. Sonic proved to be the killer app Sega needed and the viable mascot to challenge Mario. This is not the same situation as with the PS1 and the PS2, where Nintendo stumbles out of the gate, makes some fatal promotional and technological mistakes, and gives the market over to the competition. Nintendo had a viable and competent product on the market, and Sega took it straight to them. They matched them game for game with major third-party offerings like Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, NBA Jam, and Aladdin selling more on the Genesis. When Sony would eventually step into the gaming market, they made use of marketing themselves as the more mature and edgy console. This is something Sega started. It's something which hurt Nintendo's perceived market value going forward, even though Nintendo would win out in the end. Nintendo was no longer the only player in town. They had real competition, which gave gaming consumers another legitimate option besides Nintendo. Before Sega made their mark, if you wanted to play great video games, you had to own a Nintendo. Not anymore. This set the stage for other players like Philips, SNK, and Panasonic to try their hand at the home console market, and ultimately allowed Sony to step in and make their mark. Some will predictably point out, how can you ignore the immense success of the PS1 and PS2 over Nintendo? There were a whole lot of surrounding factors as to why Sony had the success it did, enough to warrant another video just on that topic. Suffice it to say, Sony had a lot of things fall in their lap, while Sega worked hard in overcoming setbacks to become competitive against stout opposition while opening the market up for others to come in. There were numerous attempts by other companies to break into the market during the reign of Nintendo. All of them failed miserably. The TurboGrafx-16, also known as the PC Engine, which was a much more capable system, couldn't make a dent in the market. Atari made attempts to get back into the fray with a new home console in the 7800 and a handheld in the Atari Lynx. Philips made the CDI in 1990. All of them tried and failed to loosen Nintendo's iron grip on the market, but Sega was the one to give Nintendo hell. Unfortunately, due to the civil war between Sega of Japan and Sega of America, they would make a myriad of poor decisions leading up to their eventual demise in the home console market. Too many cooks in the kitchen led to a schizophrenic gaming roadmap where numerous products came from Sega which cannibalized each other. The consumer trust they built with the Genesis was depleted by a scattershot of console releases with middling support. The Sega Dreamcast, which was an outstanding product with an awesome lineup of games, was a day late and a dollar short, with PS2 on the horizon, equipped with a highly sought-after DVD player. It is worth noting the Sega Master System is still being sold to this day in Brazil, selling some 8 million units for the nearly 35 years it's been on the Brazilian market. I also have to say, while it's not as iconic, the Master System is a better-looking console than the gray mini-bake oven we got from Nintendo and the toaster revision we got later. Sega is a sad story of a game maker which could have and should have been still competing with Nintendo today, making great games. Unfortunately, the Sega we knew and loved, who made all those classic home and arcade games, no longer exists. The Sega, which was bought by Sammy back in 2004, no longer has the studios and developers it had back in its glory days. The internet was all abuzz last year when Sega announced they would bring back many of their classic IPs. Too bad the people who made those great games are no longer with the company. Coupled with Sega's total capitulation to message politics, which will have adverse effects on the content of these games. All in all, I had to show my respects to one of the best game development studios ever, and Nintendo's only true rival.